Today, we're diving deep into podcast guesting as a brand building tool with an expert who knows how to turn storytelling into success, Sarah Lohse. Sarah is an award-winning author, brand strategist, and storytelling expert who has helped countless thought leaders craft their message, get booked on podcasts, and leverage guesting to build authority and grow their brand. She's spoken at major conferences like Podfest, FinCon, and Speakonomics, and she's here today to share her best strategies for standing out as a podcast guest, telling a compelling story and using guesting to fuel your business or creative career. If you've ever thought, how do I get booked on podcasts? How do I make my interviews unforgettable? And how do I turn guesting into real opportunities? In this episode is for you. Let's dive in.
Yeah, okay. Before my guests will start talking about the subject matter of the episode, I like for my audience to know who they are listening to. And so for me, the question I have is, you've built a brand around storytelling. What's the first moment you realized the power of a great story?
When did I realize the power of a great story? That's a great question. So my story, I have a story that is kind of what I built my brand around. And I would say that story is when I learned the power of story. And I was telling a story on a podcast, and it was completely irrelevant to the topic of the podcast, but it was a funny hook, so he wanted me on the show. But the way that I was interviewed on that podcast really pulled out some value that I never saw in the story before.
Yeah.
So I kind of learned on the spot that anything can be a great story if you know how to tell it right.
Well, you've spoken on major stages like Podfest and FinCon. What has been your most memorable speaking experience other than this podcast, of course?
Oh, this, of course, is number one. But close second, I would say, is actually my last speaking engagement. It was Podfest of 2025, so it just passed in January. And I'm speaking at conferences like every month, every other month. I'm doing this all the time, but I really hate public speaking, honestly. Wow. It's not something I like to do. It's just something that I know I have to do. Wow. And I don't feel like I'm that good at it. I know I have like a lot of information I can share and stories I can share, but I'm just not confident speaking from stage. But at this last one, I got off stage, and for the first time, people came up to me afterwards asking for photos with me, and they were like, we bought your book while you were speaking. We're so excited to get it. Like, they were really engaged and really drawn to the content. That was a really cool experience for me because I've never had that. I kind of felt like a Kardashian at the moment, but I would say that's probably one of my favorites.
Yeah, maybe next year it will be dethroned by another experience.
It's gonna be every time.
Yeah. Okay, we'll call it the best member experience yet for now.
Yes.
Yeah. What's a podcast interview you've done that's totally changed the way you see podcast guesting?
What's a podcast I've guested on that changed how I see guesting?
Yeah.
I would say the first one. So when I started in podcasting, I was a producer, and I was always kind of back of house. I wasn't on camera. I wasn't on mic. I was coordinating and planning and all of that. But the first podcast that I went on was Stacking Benjamins, which is a hugely successful, fantastic show about finance. And I was on there to tell a story about an embarrassing tattoo that I got on vacation one year. And I should not have been on that show. I don't know how it happened. I still laugh about it. But that was the show that I learned how to tell a story on. And it wasn't necessarily the impact of being a guest on that show, as in the reach of the show or the audience that I spoke to, but it was the change that I saw in myself from that, and the way that I learned how to tell my own story.
Yeah,
I'd say that was definitely hard to top. The host of that show actually wrote the foreword for my book a few years later.
That's for me, it's like a major success, because apart from featuring the show, you got to build a relationship. Because you've talked about your story getting started as a producer, and how now you're podcast guest, and how that experience, and even when you tell the story, it looks as if like you were not even supposed to be on the show, but for somehow you just did.
I was trying to pitch somebody else to be on the show.
Ooh.
And I got them on the show.
Okay.
I got both of us.
Okay.
Getting my client on the show was on purpose. Getting myself on the show was a complete accident.
Wow. Yeah, but it was one of those accidents that needed to happen.
I'm not upset about it.
Yeah.
It definitely has been at this point, that's the story that I've really built everything on. So changed my life.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that story. I feel like at this point in time now, I kind of like know the backstory of who I'm speaking to. And
I'm an open book.
And the audience, those that are listening at home, they know who is behind the mic. So I'd like for us to dive into podcast guesting. Podcast guesting is a deep branch on its own. What makes a great podcast guest?
I think the best podcast guests are the ones that lead with value. Podcast guesting is a really great marketing tactic, and it's really great for growing your brand. But when people look at it as a marketing tactic and they treat it that way, they never end up being a good guest. They have to be looking at it as an opportunity to share value and to tell stories and to build connections. So if you go in with that mindset, then you're already off the bat going to be a great guest. Yeah. And being open and willing to tell your personal stories, willing to be a little bit vulnerable is really important. Podcasting is a very personal medium. When you share your personal stories, you're really building connections with listeners and they get to feel like they know who you are. That is so much more valuable than just sharing information or just sharing stats and numbers. So leading with value, telling stories, and just being excited. Nobody wants to listen to a podcast where the guest sounds like they have to be there and they're not excited about it. They don't show up with a great attitude. Yeah. So I've heard those where it's like this, it almost sounds like a job interview. Yeah. So you don't want it to be like that. So just be excited about it. Be excited, be willing to share, and you're going to do great.
Yeah. The question I want to ask is, podcast guesting, how can content creators, how can we position ourselves to make ourselves more attractive for podcast hosts?
So there's a few different ways, and it can come down to the way that you pitch or just the way that you position yourself. But I would say focus on building a brand. If you're building your personal brand and you're creating content, you're on screen, you're on mic, and you're sharing stories, that's going to make you seem like a really great guest just because the podcast host will get to know you a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm a podcast host. I've had times where I bring someone on my podcast and it's a little uncomfortable. We don't know each other. I don't know who they are. I don't know their story. And you kind of have to just make your way through it and try to make it feel like there's a connection when there isn't. But if you're putting out content yourself, you're making reels, you're writing blogs, you're creating videos, whatever it is, maybe you have your own podcast, the host can go and listen and watch what you're doing and feel like they get to know you a little bit and know your personality. And if they connect with you and they really feel like this is someone that I could have a great conversation with, they're going to be excited to have you on their show.
Yeah. The next follow-up question I want to ask is, if someone is just starting out, right, as a creator, you talked about positioning yourself, putting yourself out there, building your personal brand, right? If you're just starting out in a field where you're probably just documenting your journey, right? You just, you're still learning the ropes and all that. How would positioning for such a person work?
Well, that's going to depend on the goals that you have and what you're wanting to be a guest on podcasts for, whether you're trying to build up your brand or just share ideas. So there's so many different ways that you can look at it. But I would say before you ever start trying to be on a podcast, take some time thinking about your why, the why you want to be on this show. What is your message? What are you trying to share? And if you're just getting started, you don't know everything. Of course, nobody knows everything, but I can bring someone on my show who's an expert and it could be a horrible episode because they're just spewing information. Yeah. Or I can bring someone on who's new in the game and hasn't gotten as much experience, but they're willing to share their own stories and they are excited to give the stories of the experiences that they have had and what they've learned. And they're just more open and approachable.
Wow.
So it really isn't about I have to know everything. It's I have to be willing to share everything I do know.
Yeah. So what I'm taking from what you just said is we have to spend some time to do our homework and ask ourselves what's our why, what's our message, so that it's easier for us to communicate with someone else because we know what it is.
Yeah, it's the same. And anytime you really do anything, why are you trying to do it? And podcast guesting is the same. If you can't give a good answer for why you want to be on podcasts, then maybe you shouldn't be on podcasts. And if your answer is, I want to be on a podcast because I want to sell my book, or I want to be on a podcast because I want to get clients, things that are really transactional, those are terrible reasons. And those are not reasons to be on a podcast. So spend some time thinking about what is the value that you have to share and what is driving you to be on these shows. And as long as it's something that is valuable and something that is meant for the audience to gain something, not for yourself to gain something, then you are probably in a good position.
Yeah. Because now, what I'm when I'm looking at podcast guesting, I'm kind of looking at it as not just a way to grow an audience. I'm looking at it as a way to grow relationship with the host and the guest, and right, rather than just okay, I want to grow my audience.
Yeah, there comes a point with podcasting where it can start to feel really transactional. And I had this experience. I have a co-host on my show, and he's my business partner, Larry Roberts. And he used to host a show called You're the Boss. And he would bring business owners on to talk about their business and what they do. And it was so transactional because they would just show up, talk about themselves, and then leave. And he ended up quitting doing that show. It was successful. He was building a great audience, and he was top 1% of podcasts globally or something. But he just shut it off because it felt transactional. Mm-hmm. When you go on a podcast, you want to start having a relationship with the host. You want to start even before you go on there. There's so many hosts that I've connected with on LinkedIn before I've ever been on their show. And I've started looking at their content and interacting with it and just finding different ways that I can support what they're doing so that it doesn't feel like, hey, thanks for 30 minutes of airtime. Have a nice life. Mm-hmm. You want to really have a relationship and have something valuable for both of you.
Yeah, really important. The guest I just finished talking with, one of the things he talked about was collaboration, how you can build relationships, not just how you can feed off other persons like parasites.
Yes, I think the podcast community is so collaborative, which is why I love being part of this community. But there's been guests that either hosts of shows I've been on or guests of my shows that we've gone on to either be friends or host a webinar together or release some joint content together. Or I was on their show and then I bring them on mine. There's so many different ways that you can continue that relationship. So like you said, it's not just I got mine. It's more ways to give to others, whether it's that host or their audience or your audience.
Yeah. Before I proceed with the other questions, I would love to ask you. You mentioned you have a podcast. What's the podcast about? Just for those of my audience that are curious to know.
Yeah, thank you for asking. My podcast is called Branded. It's the comprehensive guide to creative branding. I host it with Larry Roberts, and we just talk about everything having to do with building your personal brand. And whether you're starting from scratch, you're a small business owner, you're doing this on your own as an entrepreneur, whatever it is, we talk about all the different aspects of building your brand online, in person, how to network, how to grow your audience, how to do things on no budget, because a lot of us start from this is paid out of pocket. So we talk about really everything having to do with building brands, and we talk about it from our own experiences because we both have been building our own personal brands and professional brands for several years now.
Yeah. You talked about, earlier when I asked you if someone is just starting out, you talked about them knowing their why, knowing their message, and knowing their story so that it's easier for them to pull it out and share when the conversation demands for it. What are the key elements of a strong podcast pitch?
Yeah, I think I might have a pretty unique way. I know it's different than any of the pitches that I've received, and I know a lot of pitching agencies that do it a little differently than I do, but I consider a good pitch to have 3 elements. The first one is a short introduction. I think a lot of the pitches that I've gotten have been very introduction heavy. It kind of talks about the person's entire resume, their whole history, their whole story. I like to just give a very simple, like, one-line introduction that just sets the tone for, okay, this person is an expert in this topic.
Yeah.
And then go right into either a connector or a hook. And that's going to be something that is unique, whether it's I listened to this episode and I really connected with this piece of it, or I've sent a lot of ones that were like, I really resonate with the topic of your podcast and here's why. So just ways that you can really show that you connect with their show. And or the hook. So the first podcast I was on, I was talking about just a silly tattoo that I got on vacation, but it was still a good hook. And that's why I accidentally got booked.
Yeah.
So if there's something that is almost like the punchline of what you would be talking about, and you're able to tell that in the pitch, it's going to leave them wanting to know what happened next or how that happened. So it really piques their interest. So you really just hook them from that line.
Wow.
And then the third is the value. What is it that you are offering my listeners? And you'll know this, you're a podcast host. If someone's pitching to be on your show, you don't want to know all of their accomplishments and everything that they have done. You want to know, what are my listeners going to gain from this?
Yeah.
What do you have to offer my audience? Because really the only people we have a responsibility to as hosts are our listeners. It's our audience.
Yeah.
So the most important piece of any pitch is going to be that value. I would like to share my 5 steps for doing this, or the strategies I've developed for this, so that your audience can walk away knowing how to do this.
Yeah.
Just being very specific about what their audience is going to gain and letting them choose if that's going to be of value to their audience or not.
Yeah. And as a podcast host, please, if someone is out there thinking of guesting, please keep your pitch brief and straight to the point. I've had pitch that it's like an epistle. It's like, I'm like, one moment I just see the pitch, I'm like, nah, I'm not interested. Very long.
Thank you. I'm glad it's not just me. I've gotten the ones that are just the wall of text.
My God.
And there could be some great value in there. I'm sure there is, but I'm gonna be honest, I didn't read it.
I'm like, what's happening?
I don't have that kind of time.
Like, you want to make it like
keeping
snarky.
it brief.
Like,
yeah, keep it brief and be very intentional with what you're saying, and make sure that the point that you're getting across is the value that you're going to bring to their show. You don't need to tell your whole story.
Yeah.
They'll have a link to your bio in the show notes. They'll get that.
Yeah.
It's fine.
I think the goal of the pitch is necessarily to start a conversation, not necessarily to probably get a yes or any of the stuff. It's just to get the host to say, okay, yeah, I'm interested. Tell me more.
Absolutely. I love how you put that at the start of a conversation, and it's just putting the ball in their court to want to continue that conversation.
Yeah.
And the tactics that you use, they can differ whether it's a small show or a really big show, because with really big shows, you're not getting the host. You're getting their assistant. You're getting their manager, their agent.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily speaking directly to the host of the show. So it can be a little bit different, and you have to grab their attention and make it something that they feel is worth passing on to the host of the show. And in those cases, adding things that are a little bit more, I don't want to say transactional, but maybe tangible. There's been times that I've screenshot the review I left on their show and included that in it, just as I've already given you something. Here's instant value.
Yeah. No, I don't necessarily think it's transactional. I just necessarily think you have to sometimes start thinking of others other than yourself. So, okay, what's in it for them? What they get to gain, right? Why would they want me to be on their show?
The way that I always say it, and my co-host always laughs at me because I sound like such a jerk, but I say, we don't care about you. And I always sound I feel bad when I say it that way because I do sound mean, but it really is that we don't care about you. We care about our listeners and we care about our show.
Yeah.
So if you come in with, this is what I have to offer your listeners, this is the value I can bring to your show, that's what's going to get our attention.
Yeah, and that's the truth. Because when you like we were talking earlier on about the long pitch, if you start thinking of the host, like you put yourself in the shoes of the host, like the host gets a lot of pitches, he has a lot of things, like he doesn't really he or she doesn't really have that time. So you're like, okay, how can I make things easy for the host? And you're like, okay, just a couple of lines, and with a glance, they get the whole thing you're trying to say.
Yes, I think my podcast isn't even one of like the biggest podcasts out there. I'm sure they get hundreds, but I think there's like 70 something pitches sitting in my inbox that I haven't had time to go through. And if I'm going through it and there's one that's just very, very long and I can tell that this is just going to be their life story, I scroll past it.
Yeah.
Because I only have a certain amount of time to go through this. My podcast is not my full-time job. So spending that much time is hard. So if you send something short that's really value-packed and very to the point and I see the value in that, I'm going to say yes and keep scrolling.
Wow. The next question I want to ask, and I think this will really help with the pitch and every other thing, is how can we find and refine our story to make it engaging for a podcast audience?
Ooh, that is a long answer. And there's so many ways that I can answer that. But I would say one of the important things to do is just to keep telling it. And the more you tell your story, so I tell stories for a living. I have a book about storytelling. Stories are what I do. But I don't think I've ever told the same story twice. And when I say that, there's my one story, my tattoo story. I've told that story on every podcast I've ever been on and every stage I've ever been on. But every single time I tell it differently. Yeah. And the more you tell a story, especially if you're able to tell it face to face, whether it's on a stage or video on a podcast, you're able to see the reactions. And you can tell from reactions which pieces of that story are important and which ones aren't. So just paying attention to that instant feedback is going to help you sort through the details and make sure that the details that you're keeping in are the important ones and are the ones that are going to keep attention.
So what you're saying is, like, with practice, you're going to get the tune of it.
Just like everything else, you have to practice. There's also, I think it was Ira Glass said, great stories happen to those who can tell them. We all have great stories that we can tell. And one thing that we have to do is just understand what a story is. And it's something that we miss a lot, especially when it comes to podcasting and public speaking, because we hear people tell their big, dramatic story. And we live in a 24/7 news cycle where we're constantly seeing headlines. And they're all these big, dramatic and traumatic stories. Mm-hmm. But not every story has to be like that. The story that you tell can be something that happened to you yesterday afternoon on your walk home. Yeah. Your story can be something short. Your story can be something long. It can be, you want it to be emotional, but the emotion doesn't have to be sadness. I think people really rely heavily on their trauma stories, and they don't have to. If you don't want to be that open and vulnerable, you can tell a happy story. Mm-hmm. You can try to elicit joy, not just like empathy. So understanding that your story doesn't have to be this big headline-worthy story is really a great first step to being open to telling stories.
Cool. I think the first misconception everyone has is that my life is too boring. There's no story there. Like, the fact that your life is boring, that's actually a story.
I think everyone that I've told, like, you need to tell your story, will tell me that they don't have one. Or they only have one story, and it's just that trauma story. Every single day, you are living hundreds of stories.
Yeah.
And we all have that big one, and we can tell that, or we don't have to tell that. but you can tell a story about something that happened at work. You could tell like a case study type story. You can tell a story about how you came up with a really great idea. You can tell a story about something that happened 2 years ago and what you learned from it. There's so many different ways that we can incorporate stories into everything that we do. And I think people do it without realizing. I've had coaching sessions where they'll tell me that they're not comfortable telling stories. And then we'll just have a conversation and I'll say something and they'll respond with a story. But until I point it out, they don't realize that they do it. Because anytime someone says something you relate to and you respond with, oh, that happened to me too, I did this. Yeah. That's telling a story. Yeah. But we overlook that because we think that a story has to like start with once upon a time or it has to be this big moment. It doesn't. A story can just be something that you tell in any conversation at any moment.
Yeah. I think earlier on you talked about it's how you tell the story. Anything can be everything is a story, but it's how it's left for you to find and tell it in a way that wow, it's interesting.
Yeah, being able to tell a story is definitely a skill. There are a few aspects that I think are really important in order for a story to be compelling. And one of them is emotion, just making sure that not only is there emotion in the story, but there's emotion in the way that you tell it. If you're telling a really funny story, but you're telling it like this and you're really monotone and you sound kind of bored, it's not going to come off as a funny story. Yeah. So just having the emotion that matches the story is really important. And having it be relatable. People want to relate to what you're saying because humans want connections and connections come from shared experiences. Yeah. So if you're sharing a story and someone can relate to it, they're going to feel a connection to you. And that's going to be compelling for them. Yeah. And it has to be unexpected. And this can be the hardest piece because a lot of people, like I say, your story doesn't have to be big or dramatic or traumatic. So it's hard to think of a story being unexpected. So that's kind of where we take a lot of time on figuring out how do we structure a story? How do we find almost like a punchline in our story that we can deliver in a way that is kind of like a wow moment? But as long as you know how to tell the story, you can take any story and make it unexpected.
Yeah. That's true. I'm looking at certain things. I think it's all about perspective, right? There's this saying that I heard that you can either have a good day or a good story.
Oh, I like that. Or you can have a good day and a good story.
Yeah, but the reason why I'm saying this is that most of the stories will like nobody really wants to hear that. Okay, I'll give an example. I was born into a silver spoon, and I was a trust fund kid, and then they paid for everything I ever wanted in life. And now I have a lot of money. That story is boring. I'm not interested. But now you're like, okay, I applied for investment, but everybody ghosted me. Nobody would listen. But then I was able to say, okay, the thought came to me that, I should bootstrap. And I'm like, okay, how do I bootstrap? Like obstacles. And we're all having obstacles every day in one form or the other. Sometimes it is external, sometimes it is internal. Every time there's an obstacle, there is a form of like a unique story because the audience wants to know, okay, what happens next? Did you overcome? What happened?
Absolutely. When I talk about stories being relatable, the most relatable part of human existence is mistakes. Yeah. And when you talk about a mistake that you made, half of the people in the audience probably have made the same mistake and the other half feel like it's coming and they want to avoid it. Yeah. So just talking about a mistake is the easiest way to really connect and have people feel like they have that shared experience. Yeah. And I think a mistake that a lot of people make, especially on like social media when they're trying to build their brand, is we look at social media like it's our highlight reel. And we're sharing the best of everything. Oh. But that doesn't feel real. That doesn't feel authentic. But when you incorporate a little bit of your blooper reel and you admit to the mistakes that you've made and you talk about what you've learned from them and you talk about the hurdles and the obstacles, that's when you're no longer a brand but a person.
Yeah.
And people trust people a lot more than they trust brands.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. So true. Like the social media, it's just like once you go there, it's and there's nothing for someone to connect with. It's like as if you're just wasting your life. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. But then you see someone like, okay, today I was going to do this, but I didn't exactly get what I wanted to get done. And they're like, hey, at least for once, I can see somebody that's that's relatable, somebody that gets me.
Yeah, I mean, everyone knows that like the underdog stories are the ones that like everybody roots for the underdog.
Yeah.
And they're not sharing they did all this right. They're sharing that I came from somewhere really difficult and here's how I beat the obstacles and got past like the hurdles in front of me.
Yeah.
We're not just looking for, hi, I did everything perfect, because no, you didn't. It's just so inauthentic and it's so dishonest. But if you're willing to share your mistakes publicly, that helps people trust you.
Yeah. Before we go into the technical aspects of finding, talking about story and refining story, that could be an episode of his own entirely. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's a very broad topic. Before we go into the technical aspects of finding and booking guests, I'd love for you to share. You work with a lot of guests, and you also book. You pitch for guests, and you also pitch for yourself too, as a guest too. So the question I want to ask is, can you share an example of a guest who, via storytelling in an interview, it led to unexpected opportunities, like good opportunities?
So I think there's been times where we've been able to have conversations that incorporate storytelling into places that were unexpected. And I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I went on a podcast that was aimed at interior decorators, and it was a marketing podcast for interior design. And I went on to talk about storytelling. And that seemed really obscure in the beginning, but so much about our stories, especially like growing up, are built from the world around us. And a lot of that is within our homes, within these places that we've designed. And we remember so much of that design as we grow. And it reminded me of the most horrendous, ugly couch that was in my parents' basement for my entire childhood. And I hated that couch. It looked like something off of like that 70s show. I think it was originally my great-grandfather's from like the 60s. It was awful.
Yeah.
But I can think about that couch and remember all of the parties that too many of us were just crammed on that couch watching movies and laughing, or having my first kiss on that couch when I was younger. Like so many stories that I can think of when I just think about this piece of furniture. And we were able to have this really amazing conversation about the emotions and the stories that we can elicit while we're just decorating a room.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was one of my favorite conversations that just went in a really unexpected way.
Okay. Yeah.
I have no idea if that answered the question at all.
You answered the question, unexpected. But the question I asked is, after the unexpected, you add opportunity to it. I say unexpected opportunities. So the question I'm asking is, like, what opportunities has being a guest on the podcast or your clients to, what opportunities has it opened for them or you, depending on the example you want to use?
I am now an award-winning author, and that would not have happened without going on Stacking. Thank you. I went on Stacking Benjamins. That was that first podcast where I told my stupid tattoo story. And I learned how to tell a good story. And I ended up writing a book years later that not only told that whole story, but taught other people how to tell their stories and figure those out. And like I said, the host of that show wrote the foreword for it. It was a really full circle moment. And it has since won 3 awards. And it was a #1 bestseller on Amazon. So I would say that was very unexpected. I never thought I would tell my stupid tattoo story on a podcast, let alone have it turn into a book and be something that I tell from stages across the country. Okay. So I would say that's the most unexpected.
That's the answer to the question. That's the exact answer to the question. Now you've answered the question. What's the name of the book?
Perfect. It's called Open This Book, The Art of Storytelling for Aspiring Thought Leaders.
Wow. I feel like we're discussing the wrong topic currently. We should be talking about story.
Any conversation I have always ends up being about storytelling.
Yeah.
It's just where my brain automatically goes. But if you're going to be a guest on a podcast or you're going to be a host of a podcast, you need to be telling stories. You need to know how to tell a story. So I think it's definitely connected.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. The question I want to ask is, I want you to share some of the techniques and some of the tactics, right? How can you've talked about guests, pitching guests, and all that, but I'm like, okay, that's great, that's exciting. I want to be a guest on podcasts. How do I research? How do I find podcast hosts and then pitch them in terms of platforms, tools, and all that?
Sure. There is a platform, I know you're familiar with it. It's called Podmatch, and that is one that I've used for years. I know the creators of it, and they're fantastic people. It's basically online dating for podcasts, so highly recommend Podmatch. But you can also, if there's a show that you really love and you want to be a guest on it, if you go on that show's website, you can often find an email address or a contact form, and just don't be afraid to reach out to that person. If they don't have a contact form or an email on their website, go to their social media and send them a DM. Whatever it is, however you want to reach out, just do it in a way that feels really authentic to you and leads with the value that we talked about. Not a sales pitch, not a pitch of services. Don't pitch slap them. But whether it's in a DM, an email, on a platform like Podmatch, just don't be afraid to ask. I think the worst that they can say is no.
Yeah.
People are afraid to just pitch themselves because they think like, but what if they say no? Then you don't go on that podcast and you pitch a different show. It's like there's nothing really bad that's going to happen. It's okay. So just be willing to put yourself out there.
Yeah. Okay. So you talked about Podmatch. You could talk about reaching out to people on their websites and contacting them. How does someone manage all these things, right? Because by the time you start pitching 5, 6, 7, how do you know? Sometimes you might pitch the first time, but sometimes the person you pitch to is just busy that you just have to like follow up, and then they're like, oh, I totally forgot. I was hoping to reply, but thank God you followed up. Now I'm going to reply to you. And how do you manage all of them? Is there like a way to like put everything together so you don't go, you don't get overwhelmed?
If I find one, I'll let you know. That is 100% something I struggle with, for sure. If someone has like a CRM for their company, those can, I've heard, be very helpful. I have yet to figure it out. A platform like Podmatch is going to kind of streamline it for you, which can be helpful. But if it's one that is important to you, some show that you pitch that you're really excited about, just set a reminder for yourself for 1 or 2 weeks in the future that if they don't respond to this email by then, I'm going to send them another one.
Yeah.
And I used to work in PR when I started my career. We would say be pleasantly persistent. So you can continuously reach out to people, but be pleasant about it. Don't hound them. And I've had people be very rude if I miss their email, and their way of following up was like being mean to me about not responding the first time.
Yeah.
That is not a great strategy. I'm gonna then ignore that one too.
Yeah.
But if you just leave yourself a reminder and just follow up, be very polite about it. No one's ever complained about getting a polite email in their inbox.
Yeah. And if they're not interested, they'll tell you that, oh, I'm not interested. And that's the end of the conversation. Both go your separate ways.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I said, the worst that they can say is no.
Yeah. Earlier on, you mentioned that the podcast you do with your friend and co-host Laura Roberts, or what was her name again? Larry. Is it she or he? Because the name is, I thought Larry was the guy's name.
It is. Yes, he's a man.
I thought because now I was like, what's happening? I said, let me clarify that. Okay, you said you co-host a branded podcast with him, and you did make sure that that's not what you do full time. So what do you do full time? if you don't mind me asking?
Not at all. I actually Larry and I together run a podcast production house. So we help businesses and entrepreneurs launch branded podcasts to grow their business. So I am always producing, planning, strategizing, designing a podcast. Or I have Favorite Daughter Media, which is my personal company. And for that, I work with people on teaching them how to be great guests, how to tell their stories, how to be thought leaders, and just trying to help people build out their own authority.
Look, what you just did to, I was like, the scenario, let me just paint the scenario of what just happened is, I'm like asking you that, you're like telling me that, well, I don't cook full time. And I was like, okay, so what do you do full time? And now you're like telling me that I help other people cook. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm like, wow. I was expecting something else, like maybe a different profession. I didn't even know that. Okay, so basically, what I do is I help people to start their podcast. So basically, you are doing podcasting.
Okay, to specify, my podcast is not my full-time
but
job.
Podcasting,
other people's podcasts are my full-time job.
So basically, podcasting is your full-time job.
100%. I am very much immersed in podcasting day and night. I do a little bit of full-service marketing within the financial planning space for a few clients that I've kind of grandfathered in from my past life. But for the most part, everything that I do is focused on either podcasts or just thought leadership in general. I've worked with people on writing their TED Talks and just how to tell their story from a stage, things like that. Anything that I can do within the authority marketing space to help people just grow their own authority, grow their credibility, grow their voice is basically what I do all day.
Yeah. Like right now, a lot of future episode ideas are just running through my mind, and maybe later on I'll follow up with you and communicate to have you on the show in the future. The question I want to ask is, I know you've made some hints about certain things that piss you off when people contact you to be a guest on your podcast, right? Now, I'd love for you I want to put a creative spin on the question, and the question is, what's an easy way to make hosts excited about having you on their podcast? Now, I would love for you to answer it as a guest and also answer it as a podcast host.
Ooh, I mean, the best way to get someone, like to get the host to be excited is be excited.
Okay.
I've had shows that I've reached out to that, like, I almost started off the message as a fangirl, not even about like the show itself, but the concept. There are shows, there's one called My Favorite Mistake, and my whole career is built off of an embarrassing tattoo I got by accident. Being able to reach out to that, be like, oh my God, I resonate so hard with the concept of your show. We have to talk. That got their attention. We had a conversation and I was on the show. If you just show that you've done more than read the title of the show, that's going to get the host excited to have you on.
Okay.
We get the same pitches every day of, your latest episode with insert guest name here was fantastic. Can I be a guest?
What does fantastic mean?
Exactly. It never works. It's always the latest episode that just came out. Obviously, you didn't bother to even scroll.
What exactly was fantastic about the episode?
My favorite was they named a specific guest and said, we loved hearing him talk about like the future of content creation or something. That guest talked about taxes.
Wow.
And how to do your taxes as a creator.
Wow.
Nothing to do with the future of content creation. There's so many ways you can just out yourself as just obviously you did not actually do your research, do your homework, and you're just trying to fake it.
Yeah.
And it's easy to see through. So if you want to tell a host that you loved their show, actually love their show. Actually be able to talk about an episode that you listened to and what was great about that episode. Be able to quote it like, oh, I loved when your guest said this. And I loved it because I connected to it for this reason. Yeah. If you can show that you actually do have some kind of personal connection to the show, it's almost like you have like some skin in the game. You want the show to be great, and the value that you're pitching is in order to bring something to the show that will help make it great. Like, we want you to care about our show as much as we do.
I think you answered both as a host and a guest altogether. Is there an answer you give as a host? Because I feel like you answered everything together.
Well, if you're a host pitching someone to be a guest.
Yeah. So what I want you to say is, like, I want you to answer it from your perspective now as a host, right? Like, what you've seen, the certain pitches you've gotten that has made you like super excited to like get the person on your podcast for you to, and stuff like that. Wait, before you even answer, do you interview guests on your podcast?
Yes.
Okay.
Our show is a combination of just me and my co-host, and then
I guess
having guests on. So we do a combination.
Yeah, I just wanted to be sure of that before I start asking you.
Yeah, when I've pitched guests to be on the show, and I've gotten pitches from other people to be on the show, I think the one that was my favorite, it actually released just a couple weeks ago, but I found accidentally on LinkedIn an actor from a show I watched 20 years ago on Disney Channel. And I DM'd him like, hey, I don't know what you're doing right now, like in your life, but in 2006, you were on this show and I have questions about that show.
Yeah.
And it was completely bizarre. No one had ever like brought that up to him. He's like, I didn't think anyone even remembered me from that show.
Yeah.
And we started a genuine conversation, ended up on a Zoom call for an hour, just like talking about what each of us do. And I asked him to be on the podcast, and he was happy to do it. And I had so much fun with it just because of this random connection that I felt to him from literally 2006 when I was 11. He was on a show I watched. That's kind of that piece when I talked about what you want to pitch is one thing to include is that connector. So for me, pitching him, the connector was, I watched you in this show 20 years ago. Yeah. And we had a conversation that was genuine, and the episode, what I thought was going to be just a funny conversation about like childhood actors, it was one of the most vulnerable and like deep conversations, like the most raw conversation we've had on the show yet. But it all started because I sent a silly DM about a TV show. So there's really no limit to how you can open when it comes to pitching somebody. Yeah. Just find something that connects you with them. Yeah. And they're going to appreciate that you put that thought into it.
Yeah. I think my key takeaway from what you said so far is when we pitch to people, we should pitch to them as people, not a brand or companies, right? We should try to get personal and try to find a connection.
100%. I couldn't have said that better.
Like
people are people, and people connect to people.
Yeah.
And while I talk about building a brand and the importance of building a brand, you still want who you are to be front and center. Yeah. You still want the humanity to be what shines through. Yeah. Because people don't want to interact with a business. Yeah. They want to interact with a person.
Yeah. That's true. And like the terrible pitch you give example of, it just shows that, okay, this is somebody who is mass spamming a lot of podcast hosts just to get featured and promote their book and all that. Like, you're not looking to connect, to know, or build relationship or any of the stuff.
Yeah. If you're going to be on a show, you don't have to become best friends with the host, but at minimum, share the episode and try to increase the reach, help the host reach your audience the same way they're letting you reach theirs. Yeah. Just have it do something that makes it less of a transaction. Yeah. Continue the conversation, continue sharing the content and engaging your audience with their show. Yeah.
Well, the last final follow-up question I want to ask is, for someone like me who's kind of like mathematical, I like to see things in numbers and all that, right? What metrics would you suggest that one keep track of, so such that I can look at those numbers? There's this saying that what gets measured gets improved, right? So I can say, okay, my pitch is terrible, my story is terrible. Oh, I need to refine that. Okay, I'm getting more acceptances. I'm actually going to podcasts. Okay, I think I'm doing well on the podcast because the podcast host, they are inviting me to come on their podcast again. That's a sign for something. What are the things we should be looking at so that we can know if we're doing terrible or we're doing well?
Ooh, so this is advice that I give and don't take is listen to every episode that you're on. I hate listening to myself on podcasts. I'm not going to lie. It is my least favorite thing to do. If it accidentally comes on while I'm trying to just share it, I immediately mute the computer. But you should be listening to yourself on every podcast that you go on, because you'll know if it was good or not. You'll know. And of course, you're going to be way too hard on yourself. I've done webinars where I've then cried for 3 hours because I felt like it was so terrible. We're hard on ourselves always, but just listen to yourself and listen to the story that you tell and see if you liked the way that you told it or if there's something that you want to change. And like I said, I've never told the same story twice. The next time you tell it, you'll tell it better. So definitely listen to the episodes. But if it's pitching, see what's working. If you sent the same pitch to a couple of shows and none of them have responded, it's probably not the best pitch. If you've sent a pitch to a show and they did respond and they were excited about it, go in that direction. So it's really just following what works.
Yeah.
And being willing to try different things, being willing to tell the stories, being willing to share the content, being willing to ask to be on shows. I think getting past the imposter syndrome of thinking like there's no reason for me to be on this show, that is the biggest challenge we see.
Wow.
For sure.
Would I be right if I say that you're someone who has grown your personal brand through podcast guesting?
That's been a big piece of it, yes.
Okay, so what's like your target, your number, like maybe in a year or in a month or stuff like that?
Oh, for how many shows?
Yeah, do you like have a number like, okay, this year I'm going to go to maybe 20 shows or 30 shows or stuff like that?
That's interesting. I really don't. I think I was doing it a lot more in the beginning, and I was probably guesting on a show at least twice a week. These days, it's a lot more infrequent, and it's only if there's a show that I'm really excited about, I'll pitch to, or if someone pitches to me that it seems like a good show to be on, I'll go on it. But I don't do as much guesting. For other people that are starting out, I would say start off a little bit slow, because if podcasts don't come out the day that you record them, so leave some time that you can hear, like the first couple of shows that you go on, leave some time so that you can listen to the episode when it comes out before you've done another like 10 interviews. Because if you're making the same mistakes over and over again without realizing it, it's going to hurt you. So start off slow and don't try to stack interviews and do like multiple a week until you're really comfortable doing it.
Yeah. I think at the beginning we need to spend a lot of time reviewing and getting feedback on what we're doing. Thank you so much for that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like the fact that you rounded up the talk with where someone can start guesting but doesn't know where to begin. Thank you so much for that. It's as if you could read my mind. That was like the next question I wanted to ask you. Yeah.
I've done this before.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a master at this. I'm a pro.
I try. I try.
Sarah, this has been packed with so many insights. Where can our listeners go to connect with you, learn more, and grab your book, open this book?
Sure. Well, if you're interested in learning more about telling your story, my book is part journal to start actually writing out your story. And I did separate the journal entries into their own downloadable journal you can get for free at openthisjournal.com. And while you're there, you'll find all of my contact info, my services, my social media, all that fun stuff.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I can't say that's a privilege. Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you so much.
That's it for today's episode of Wisdom Journey. If you found this insightful, helpful, and you learned a lot from this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on your respective podcast listening platform. It really helps other persons discover the show. Yeah, keep creating, keep learning, and most importantly, keep sharing your journey. You never know who needs your wisdom today. You see what I did there? Until next time, stay inspired and keep going.